Okay. We're going to start an interview to discuss some questions that came out of some writing that you did. And one of the first questions that came to my mind was, why did your father's family come to the U.S.? And what do you know about his journey here?
Well, unfortunately, I know nothing about the journey, and I can only assume that the reason they came is because to avoid probably conscription in the army for my father, though he was already beyond that age. At the time in Russia, they used to conscript children at the age of 12. Jewish children they used to take at the age of 12 into the army. That's a story unto itself. And probably because they already had family here related to my grandmother. My grandmother had a number of sisters, and one of them was married to a man by the name of Alpert, who lived in Watertown, New York. And it may be the fact that they were already in America that they would join them. And then it may be fear of having another pogrom there, because my aunt once told me a story about one of her uncles who was killed. He was actually axed to death, if she remembers. So maybe all these reasons
Combined. But you don't, but you don't know that from...
I don't know that from any document or anything, but just assumptions based on the experience that Jews had in Russia at the time.
So how old was he when he came here?
He was 18 years old. He was born 1881, and they arrived at the end of 1899.
So they moved to Watertown immediately?
Well, I'm not sure if they all moved there, because there was a relative in Philadelphia by the name of Susskind who had a factory. And my father worked in the factory there for a while before he joined the family in Watertown. Unfortunately, the city of Philadelphia did not have city directories at that time. And I once tried to find a record of his actually living there, even records of the Susskind family, and there's nowhere I could find them. But that doesn't mean that he wasn't there, because this is based on what my mother knew about him. So eventually they moved to, he ended up in Watertown with the rest of the family.
And that's where you met your mother?
No. Actually, he remained in the family moved to Rochester in 1905, and he remained in Watertown until 1910. And during that time, we had a meat market called the Chicago Meat Market. And I have a picture of his standing in the meat market And I always thought it was a kosher market that he ran, but it turns out that he was selling hogs. So he was selling ham.
Well, that's interesting.
And, and I asked an old-time butcher who came from Europe whether it was possible that a butcher shop would have both kosher meat and non-kosher meat. And his remark was that it happened. So that at one end of the shop was all kosher meat, or maybe it was next door, and then they also sold non-kosher meat.
How did you find that out, that he sold ham?
That he what?
That he sold pork. How did you find that out?
Well, he took I have a picture of him standing in his shop, in his butcher shop,
And there's a...
and what's hanging on the wall. I never noticed that at first, but then one day I took a closer look. And these were slaughtered hogs that were hanging on hooks.
So there you go.
That's evidence.
That's evidence. So, was he trained as a butcher?
I don't know. Well, you didn't have to be trained, I guess.
He just set up shop?
Well, his father was a shochet, which is a slaughterer. He slaughtered the meat according to Jewish tradition.
Okay, so he was trained to do that. Okay.
His father.
His
was
father.
Trained, as a matter of fact, I have documents for my grandfather that were written in Philadelphia, and they're dated, and they're dated shortly after he arrived. These are documents that were written by two rabbis and another shochet, indicating that he's a good man and he's a God-fearing man, and he is a fine slaughterer. And as a matter of fact, there's one of the rabbis was a rabbi of a synagogue that still stands today in Chicago, about 3 or 4 blocks away from where Rebecca lives.
Mm.
Yeah. And when I walked in the morning there, I went by it, there was nobody around. But someday I'd like to go in there and check it out.
Yeah. They might have other records there, more records.
Who knows? But I could never find any reference in the Ellis Island. Ellis Island, has a big website.
Right.
And I imported their name, and there's never any recognition. And I found out at one point the names of ships that docked on the day that my father indicated in his application for citizenship. And I went to the Mormon church in Rochester, where they have a hookup with Salt Lake City.
They've got a lot of records.
They have a lot of records.
Yep.
And they sent me the video, of the ship's logs of the 3 ships that appeared in New York,
Yeah.
that docked in New York on the date that my father indicated. And 2 ships, I went through the records, couldn't find any Braveman there. And the 3rd ship, for whatever reason, was all blank.
Hmm.
So there's a number of possibilities. One is it may have been on that ship, And number two, the date that he put on his application for citizenship may not be the actual date they arrived.
Right.
So,
What about a change in the name? Did the name stay the same?
well, the name was not Braveman, but it was Braveman.
Spelled?
Well, it was spelled like Braveman without an E.
Okay.
But but that's an interesting story too about that spelling. Because Don once sent me a journal, a law journal, that had an article about a man by the name of Aaron Braveman, spelled B-R-A-V-M-A-N, who had a valve, an aortic valve replacement, and they gave him an artificial.
Well,
Okay, we're in business again.
we're back.
So I was starting to say about the name Braveman, is that this man spells his name B-R-A-V and M-A-N, and he had this valve replacement, and it was making noise. With every tick of his heart, you could hear it. It kept him from sleeping and everything else. So he sued the hospital and the maker of the valve and everything, and he lost the case. So, make a long story short, I managed to get in touch with him and asked him about the spelling of the name. And he said, well, that's the way it was when his family came from Europe. It was Braveman. He says, but they all call me Braveman. I thought that was interesting. And then once when I was in Florida, I looked up in a phone book, Braveman's, and there was an Aaron, B-R-A-V-M-A-N. And I called him up. It turns out it's the same guy.
Oh, really? You were chasing him. He's like,
So anyway, and the name Braveman actually has a meaning in German. Braveman is a good man. It's like Goodman. So it's the same thing.
did you check that? Did you do that search in the Ellis Island thing? Braveman?
I checked the different spellings, all kinds of
Nothing happened. Okay.
Nothing happened. But I suspect that because of the close proximity in dates between the time my father claimed he arrived in America, he said he arrived in New York, but it's possible he arrived in Philadelphia.
Yeah.
And Philadelphia does not have the records that New York has, and it's hard to locate them. And when I was in Philadelphia for a couple of days once, I went to the library and couldn't find anything.
So we were talking about really where he was at geographically, and he had a butcher shop
In Watertown.
and then he moved,
And then he moved to Rochester.
and he didn't open up another butcher shop.
No.
What happened?
Well, I don't know. Probably wasn't because of Rochester. In Rochester, there was a Jewish butcher shop on every corner on Joseph Avenue.
Too much competition. Okay.
And he decided to go into the junk business. And he worked for another company. He worked for Rosenthal and some. I Just can't recall the name. But it's a place that I think existed for a long time on St. Paul Street. And I don't know how long he worked for them, and the next thing he did is went into business for himself. And he did not do metals. He did rags and paper and cardboard. And that was his demise. Because this material was packed in 400-pound bales, and they used to ship them by train. And he was taking the load down to a railroad siding where they were loaded, and he was in back of the truck, propping up one of the bales, and as he went to jump off the truck, he told the truck driver to back up, and he never got out of the way of the truck and got pinned to the railroad car. And then the story of what happened is in the newspaper. Do you ever get those clippings?
I only got a wedding clipping.
That's the only clipping you got? Well, the others you never got?
We talked about it, but you never sent them.
Oh my.
We talked about it, but I never got them.
I never sent that.
No. I didn't know if you were able to get them into a sendable form. But I told you to mail them, but I never got them from you.
No, I thought
You were going to photocopy them, I thought, and just put them in the mail.
Yeah.
Well, you can just do that when you get home. But that's.
You know, that's strange because for some reason I thought you had all that.
Well, I have quite a bit, but I just don't have.
No, I mean about the newspaper. But I thought in what I sent you, I think I had that, didn't I? Did I have about his funeral?
No.
No, but in what I sent you in the email.
Yeah, I haven't. That's the one thing I don't have printed here, but that was a Word file, which I read, and that's why I came up with these questions. But there were no other attachments, or if there were attachments and I couldn't open them or something.
No, but I think in the document itself.
You talked about the funeral?
Yeah.
Oh, sure. I read that.
Oh, okay.
Oh, yeah. But I mean, newspaper clippings, I don't have.
You don't have those.
But sure, that thing that you wrote is how I came up with these questions in the first place.
Okay, I'll send you copies of the. See, those copies from the library are not great. I'll send them to you. What I have.
But he ran this business. This was his business, and he ran it for how many years before he met your mother? A long time, or 5 years, or?
I don't know. Well, he came to Rochester in 1910, so I don't know how many years he worked for Rosenthal. I don't know. He must have met her. Well, he never met her. That's the interesting part about it. She lived in Oil City, Pennsylvania. And he had no occasion to go to Oil City, Pennsylvania. He used to ride around in the area of Rochester. He used to travel, and we used to buy up stuff. Now, I don't know how he traveled. I don't think he had a car. He had a horse and wagon, but I don't think he took a horse and wagon all the way to Caledonia, is where he used to go to Caledonia, because I met a man who years later who told me that my father used to stop at their house because it was a safe house. They were kosher,
Mm.
so he could eat there.
Mm-hmm.
How he got to Caledonia, I have no idea.
Train?
No, I mean he used to pick up papers and rags there and stuff. Uh,
So he didn't meet your mother. Is arranged?
no,
What's
it
the
was
story?
it was probably an arranged wedding.
Oh, this slipped. We're back.
It was probably an arranged wedding.
It was
Because-
so you don't know for sure.
Well, I can't figure out how he met her.
No one ever told you the story? She never told you?
Never. I don't even know if it's... At home I have a tape of an interview that my brother did of my mother. And she talks about being married to him, my father. One of the things she says there is she couldn't understand. Now he was 15 years old, her senior,
Okay.
and couldn't understand why he would marry her. There must have been good-looking women in Rochester, and she never thought of herself as being beautiful. She says that on the tape, but I have pictures of her wedding picture. I think he was a pretty woman, and he was a good-looking man.
Mm-hmm.
But she could never figure out, first of all, how he got away with not being nabbed by somebody. And
So she felt like he was a good catch.
and how? But she could never figure that out. Why he chose her? Somebody who came from a small town. She was a bright woman. And why he couldn't find somebody in Rochester, she never understood. And then when she came to Rochester, she saw a lot of good-looking women. And why he waited till he was 35? 35? He was 34 when he got married. That was old for
Oh.
those days.
So in the marriage, in the wedding announcement, we've kind of talked about this already, but it talked about him being a wealthy merchant, and we've talked about how he was making his money, but you also talked in your story about he was a very philanthropic person,
That's right.
and he had a lot of activities other than his work.
Oh yeah. He was a member of practically every Jewish organization in town, and he was on the board of a number of them. He was on the board of the children's home, and was responsible, one of the people responsible for bringing the superintendent to Rochester, who was born in Jerusalem but lived in Binghamton. And he was very active in the Jewish home that was just established in 1920. Less than a year before he was killed. And he had, he was regarded by the Jewish community as a leader of the community. So, he had a lot of things going. And they were only married for 6 years.
That wasn't very long.
And in 6 years, they had 3 children. Well, actually, they only had 2 and 2.5. Zelik, my younger brother, was born 4 months later.
Mm. That must have been very difficult.
It was very difficult of course, for all of us, primarily for my mother,
Yeah.
who did well, more or less, as well as could be expected. But 5 years later, she had what was described as a nervous breakdown, and eventually we all went back to Oil City and she was hospitalized, and we were farmed out. Like, my younger brother stayed with my grandparents, and I stayed with one of my mother's aunts, and my older brother stayed with the second one.
How long did you stay with the aunt?
I think it was about a year.
How old were you?
I was about 6.
So you remember that.
Oh
So this is before you went to Palestine.
yeah, oh yeah.
So you were there for a year. Did you see your mother? Did you visit her?
Well, we could visit her. She was in a psychiatric hospital. I guess they wouldn't let children. It was not a happy time,
No.
obviously. But eventually, it's a kind of an unbelievable story. My grandmother was a very, very strong woman, and she took my mother to anybody that she thought. She was a woman without any formal education. But she heard about a doctor who was a student of Freud's in New York. She took her to him, and she took her to other doctors. And eventually, she took my mother to Chicago, where there was a Jewish faith healer. And he healed her,
That's how she got well.
and she got well.
What happened? Did
And
she talk about it? What did he do to
she
you?
never talked about it.
She didn't.
Never talked about it. And we never had, and I never knew this story until after she was gone.
Who told you?
Her younger sister, who used to go with her mother. So because she had a couple other crises in her life, my mother. But somehow nobody knows what this guy did. I don't know what he did, but you know, she married a second time in Palestine. And that's probably why we went there. Her mother wanted her to get married.
Mm-hmm.
And that too was an arranged marriage. And the man who was the chief rabbi, Rabbi Abraham Cook, was the man who performed the wedding. And it turned out that this man was a very bright man, but he had all kinds of delusions of grandeur regarding business ventures. And he had no money, so my mother used to back them up in one venture,
Mm.
and eventually that didn't work out. His profession actually was, he knew electrical work, but he was also a bookkeeper. He was very, very bright. He just didn't know how to apply it.
So she lost
His-
money.
Pardon?
She lost money.
Yeah.
And this is the rabbi.
No, he wasn't a rabbi.
This is her husband.
Her husband.
Okay.
He wasn't a rabbi. He really wasn't Orthodox either at the end, it turned out. But that's another story about this man.
So you remember this man.
Of course.
Was he kind?
Well, in a sense, you see, he was a right-winger, okay? And my older brother, Svi, was a very left-winger. And they used to fight all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And Svi knew how to get his goat. And it was not a happy situation. But then what happened was that my mother became pregnant, and she decided she wanted this child to be an American citizen. So she went back to the States to have a baby. And she was gone for, I don't know how many months, not a year, but whatever she was.
So, and you were left with this.
She took my younger brother with her.
So you and Zvi were with this
And
guy.
my older brother was at a agricultural school. It was a resident school.
Yeah.
So I was left with him. And on occasion I used to meet him in the street with women.
Oh.
And he used to introduce me to him as his cousins or something.
How old were you at this time?
Pardon?
How old were you by this time?
I was about 14.
So you
But I had no suspicion.
had no suspicion.
But
Okay.
what I think happened is that my mother had friends who may have also seen him and reported.
I see.
But that was only part of the deal. My mother bought a lot in a suburb of Tel Aviv on which to build a house. And because we were renting and we were moving every year, we were moving from one place to another. And before she left, the foundation was in. And it was on a beautiful lot. I mean, it wasn't developed, but it was between two streets on the side of a hill, okay? And this was at the top of the hill. And it was a nice lot. I was out there a number of times. And she left him $10,000 in which to finish the building.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of that, he met a friend of his who was a man who drilled for water. Okay?
Yeah.
So I don't know whether he owed him the money or what it was, but that's where the money ended up. So when she came back, and first of all found out they didn't do anything about the house, and secondly probably got the stories from her friends about other women, she decided the only thing she should do is go back the States. And there were other reasons for that. That is the yard, the junkyard that my father left. And by the way, that's a story in itself, because we used to go and play there a lot.
This is before
When
you
we
went to
were kids.
Palestine.
Yeah, when we were kids, my father's still living. And we used to go into his office. And there were two things in his office that I still remember. One of them was a ball of tinfoil. People used to save tinfoil.
Mm-hmm.
It was a huge ball. And the other thing was a ball of not thread, but something that was heavier than thread. It was a
Twine.
it was not twine. It was a kind of a twine, but it was very light. And every time they got some of that, they used to tie it and they used to roll it. And the ball must have been about a foot in diameter already, or so I remember. Now, there was a man who bought it up, and my mother held the mortgage, but he never paid it. So she had to go home, and she wanted to go home and sell it. Now, I tell you all this because throughout this whole ordeal, she never broke down. You know? Even after that severe psychosis that she suffered from, you know, usually they say people are never cured, they only learn to cope.
Right.
I don't know, maybe she was just coping, but
So she didn't. She
Huh?
was never hospitalized ever again. She never had any psychiatric problems ever again.
I don't remember her being out. Well, she had a lot of, later on in life, she had a lot of, she had what they call a spastic colon, you know,
Oh yeah.
whatever that is.
Well,
She suffered
Yeah.
from stuff like that. She lived to be nearly 90 years old.
But-
She lived longer than anybody else in her family. She had 5 sisters. One died mysteriously. Well, I don't know how she died, but to me it was always a mystery. And her other sisters, her brother died young. She had one brother who died at the age of, I think 40. Age of 40.
well, how did you feel about her? Because she left you when you were 6, and then she left you again.
Well, let me.
How did that make you
I just
feel?
want to point something else out here about I'll come back to that. And then she married again.
When she came back.
When she came back in 1945, when I was in the army overseas when she got married. She married a man who wanted to marry her originally, who was from Oil City
Mm.
and who knew her. And I don't know whether she would have married him or not, but my father came along and they were married. And this man was ultra-Orthodox, and they eventually went back to Israel and lived there for a number of years, but he couldn't stand it because he found that the Israelis were not religious
Yeah, you were
anymore.
saying that.
So they came back to the States. Now they were married for about 25 years. And when he died, she was depressed. But she wasn't, I don't know if she had any care or not, but she didn't, I know she wasn't hospitalized. So it was it was a natural thing, you know, when you lose
Mm-hmm.
a husband after 25 years. Yeah. Um, so again, I can't explain how this all happened. Now, you asked me how I felt about her. Well, I think, I don't remember any loving moments as a child, you
Hmm.
know? I don't have any memories of that. And I assume that after my father was killed, it kind of killed a lot in her.
Do you remember any before? Or before your father died?
Well, I was 2.5.
You can't really remember. So you really don't have any memories at all.
Well, no, I wrote that I have some memories
No,
of
no,
him.
but of loving moments.
No, I don't. I don't have any memories of that.
Hmm.
And then, of course, I was angry when she went back to the States.
Yeah, I'm sure.
And then, well, as kids, growing up in Palestine, I don't know, we were sort of left to ourselves in a way. You know, I had friends and I used to spend time with my friends. I don't remember being home too much. Then I belonged to a youth group, and so I don't remember much about home life. I remember about discovering some pickles that were being made, and
Food.
and before they were ready, we ate the whole jar of them, and she made us take castor oil. But these were pranks that kids played.
So I imagine.
And then of course, when we came back here, and I started to be friends with Lil, and she objected to this all the time. You know, she used to say, "How do you know she's the only girl for you? Have you ever taken any other girls out?" You know, so that really evoked much
That
of
didn't
a
make you happy
positive
either.
relationship.
I imagine you probably didn't want to come back to the U.S. because if you had friends there,
Yeah, well, that was another thing.
if your life was there,
Yeah.
and then you have to come here. So that probably didn't make you very happy either.
That was,
So you were kind of moved around a lot in different ways.
in a way, not.
Yeah. No, it's not all bad, but that's part of
Well,
who you
yeah.
are. That's part of who you are.
I mean,
Maybe it's why you're a traveler now. You're on the go. You're always on the go.
oh, you think that's a product of my upbringing? Could be, I don't know.
It's what you're used to. Although Lil kept you in Rochester for many years.
Yeah, but we used to go a lot of places.
Oh yeah, I know, but I'm just.
No, I know what you mean. No, I actually always wanted to go back to Israel. And originally we planned to, and then Lynn was very close to her siblings,
Yeah.
and especially to Harold, the youngest one. He practically brought him up because he was 2 years old when they went into the home.
Right.
And she always felt responsible for him. She really did.
So how old were you when you met Lil?
I was probably 18.
So she had been out of the home for not very long. How long?
When I first met her, she was still in the home.
You met her when she lived there.
Yeah,
I see.
yeah, she was still there. And then She was actually a year younger than her birth certificate said. Of course, if this gets published, I can go, well, it can't do anything to me, but maybe I'd owe money to the, Social Security, because her uncle somehow got her birth date changed. And because she wanted to get, you had to be 18 to be able to leave the home.
Right, and she wanted out.
And she graduated when she was 17. And she wanted to get out of the home.
Mm-hmm.
So her uncle somehow got the date changed. So she never knew for sure whether she was born on the 27th when we celebrated her birthday, or the 24th of July. And they changed 19 to 18. I guess the records were kept in pen and ink.
Yeah.
And they changed the 4 to a 7, and changed the 9 to an 8, which is fairly easy to do.
Right.
So I met her, she was still in the home.
I'm going to take a break. Okay.
But, you know, in spite of all that, I have great admiration for her in the way she lived her life.
Your mother?
Yeah. And also I respect her in that when she moved back, after her third husband died, after a year of, actually a year of mourning for her, she decided to go back to Israel. And once she got there was a complete transformation. That's not the right word. You know, a complete change for her. She became alert and awake and interested. And, she lived in a proprietary home in the suburbs of Jerusalem. Now, what I started to say is that we used to go to Israel quite often while she lived there. And it was very difficult for Lil to go to visit her, but she went. The real breakup occurred when Lil used to write to her every week. Every week she used to write. And then my mother wrote to her once, "I'd like to see my son's handwriting." And then she used to send letters and cards, anniversary cards, used to address them to me.
Only.
Yeah.
So why was Lil writing her every week?
No, that's after we got married.
Right, but I mean, because she wasn't very nice from the very beginning. Lil was making an effort to try to warm up to her?
Well, not really. You see, Lil wasn't aware of all this.
Of how your mother felt about her?
Yeah.
So your mother hid it?
Yeah, she never said anything. I never told Lil that my mother
Okay.
didn't want me to marry her.
So your mother didn't outwardly act
No.
hostile? Okay.
Until that happened. You know, until she said, "I want to see my son's handwriting." And then of course she never wrote to her again.
Right.
And And then when she used to address letters only to me, you know, she knew it was something was wrong. And then we used to go visit her in Israel. And I forget which visit it was. We walked into her room and she looks at Lil and says, "Oh, you put on weight again." Just what Lil loves.
Yeah.
And, you know, and even after that, she continued to go to visit her. And the last time we visited her, I think, my mother said to her, "You know, I know I didn't treat you right all these years.
Mm.
Why don't we kiss and make up?" And Lil said to her, "It's too late."
Really?
Yeah.
Well,
I don't blame her.
yeah, she didn't want to let her off the hook at the end. Did your mother treat your brothers' wives this way,
Well,
or just Lil?
we used to have discussions about that as to who was the mistreated the most.
Okay, so she wasn't crazy about someone, and then Lil was
Well,
the.
she was crazy about Danny's wife because she came from an Orthodox background, and her father had money.
Do you think Danny had it easier in general? He was the baby, and
In that regard.
but not
I think so.
otherwise.
No, and he lived with her. I don't know, whatever it was. She never treated his wife, and I don't think she ever mistreated the other wives either. But there was just a general feeling that she didn't like any of them. Nobody was good enough for her sons, that kind of an attitude.
Yeah,
But in the case of Lil, it was really,
worse.
well, it wasn't really worse, but it was overt. And, you know, she knew Lil was sensitive about her weight. You know, they say to her, "Oh, I see you
Right.
gained weight again."
It's the worst thing.
I don't know. Maybe you could check it up to senility or something, but it wasn't senility. So,
But when you met Lil, she was still. We were talking before. Lil was still living in the home.
yeah.
So were you part of this group of Zionists that went there?
Yeah.
You were part of that group.
As a matter of fact, I joined the group because Lil was
Okay, so you weren't part of the group until.
originally. I wasn't.
So were you into the politics before you joined the group, or you got into it after you joined the group?
Well, I was into different politics because when I lived in Palestine, I belonged to a group that was it was called the General Zionist Group. In other words, it was not right, it was not left, it was somewhere in between. And my two brothers belonged to the other group, the radical group.
The left-wing group.
Right. And my older brother tried to, he tried all kinds of methods of trying to get me involved there. And I had my friends in this other group. You know, turn it off for a minute.
Okay.
So he tried all kinds of ways. He used to send girls around to the place where we used to meet. Our group used to meet on the seashore on Friday nights, and they used to send girls over. Well, most of our group were boys, and they used to send girls around and try.
They would recruit any way they could.
Yeah, but it didn't. None of it worked on me. All my good friends were in this group, and it wasn't going to move. But when I came to the States, I was kind of lonesome, and and we didn't have a branch. Our movement didn't even have a branch in the United States, let alone in Rochester. And they had a branch in Rochester, and I was invited to a party one night, and Lil was there, and when I came there at this party, I knew a game, a mental game, and I played with a number of people, and then somebody said, Lil will figure it out. And she figured it out. And, you know, she had nice looking legs.
But it was her brain that...
And it was her brain, she had a sparkle in her eye. And became very attractive. And we became friends. That's how it all started.
And you didn't date anyone else?
Never.
It was just her?
Well, I did have she will know this, I had a girlfriend in Palestine. But it wasn't, she was part of this group that I belonged to. But it wasn't a sort of a platonic great relationship. She lived not far from where I did. But that's the way it happened.
So you were in the group kind of for social reasons, and then you got into the politics.
And then I got into the politics.
But what about Lil? Was she into the politics, or was she social reasons
Lil
too?
was, you know, Lil was a woman's liberal when she was in high school. She wrote her senior thesis on emancipation of women. She was very much into that.
Yeah.
And she had strong principles. When she was in high school in her senior year, this was 1937, 36, 37. And she took German. And the teacher had the kids learn Deutschland über alles. That was the national anthem of Germany. And she refused to sing it. And he kicked her out of class. And this is towards the end of the year, you know, she had to take the regents, and so she went into the chairman of the language department. And he said to her, don't worry about it. She took the regents, she passed it.
Mm-hmm.
But she stood up for what she believed. She was a principal woman. I'm sorry I could never get her to go to college. She never went to college.
That was my next question. Did you think about it? Or did you think about it? Or you had this plan to go to Palestine, so...
We planned to go to Palestine. That's what neither one of us planned to go to college. And we got married. We got married 3 years later. Okay? In between that time, I spent 2 years at a training camp.
The Army?
Farm.
Oh, farming.
It's a farm. There wasn't much farming. And I spent most of the time, the largest part of the time, working in a sanitarium as a waiter. That's a whole story in itself.
What's a sanitarium?
It was a TB sanitarium that belonged to an organization called the Workmen's Circle. it was a Jewish organization, and most of the people there had come from Europe, and they only spoke Yiddish. That's where I learned a little Yiddish.
Okay.
And that was an interesting life because there were a number of us, about 4 or 5 of us from this training farm that worked there. Most of the people, see, we had no income from the farm, and all the income we got depended on work that we did outside of the farm. You know, some people worked as secretaries, others worked in other places, but for a number of months, I actually worked on the farm, and I had charge of the horses. We had 3 horses, and that meant the main part of the job with the horses was to cut hay. And we didn't have a tractor. It was all done by horsepower.
Oh, wow. So you were laboring.
Oh yeah, well that was the point, preparing to live in a kibbutz.
Yeah.
And then preparing socially to live in a kibbutz. You know, you have to live with strange people, and it's an interesting experience. And
Now, so you did this for 2 years. Was Lil with you? Did she do this?
no,
Okay.
Lil was not. Lil was in Rochester working.
So you were apart.
We were apart. She came down there for a while. She was not happy there.
She didn't want to participate.
Well, she participated, and she worked, and she did kitchen work, and it was like a commune. So
Yeah.
we did, the laundry was all done together and everything like that. And,
Why wasn't she happy?
well, I think she already had her doubts whether she was going to go. And
Did you realize that at the time?
not really.
No. When did she tell you for the first time that she wasn't going to go?
Well, that was after the war broke out in Europe.
Yeah.
We were not in the war yet, and I was after 2 years there. The organization decided to send me to Baltimore to organize a group there. And I was about as fit to organize the group as I was for a lot of other things that I did in my life. And she came down to visit me and said that she decided she doesn't want to go to Palestine. We were already married.
Oh, you were married.
We were already married.
So when you got married, you thought you were going.
Right.
Okay.
So we talked about it, and I told her, I guess it was a cop-out on my part, because I knew I wasn't suited to do the job that I had undertaken to do. You know, the idea was to organize kids into this organization. And I didn't know the first thing about how to go about doing it. And I figured this is a way to leave the movement. So it was a cop-out on my part.
Well, that's okay. That was just the Baltimore part, but what about the other part of it, which was not going to Palestine?
Well, that was the point. The war broke the war was going.
Did
Nobody
you-
was going to Palestine at that time.
So nobody was going anyway.
Nobody was going anywhere. But that didn't mean that people left the movement necessarily.
I
They
see.
were waiting till the war was over. And I decided that I wasn't going to go. Because if I was going to go, that meant we would have to break up our marriage. And I'd have to stay in Baltimore and try to do something that I wasn't capable of doing.
So you had to leave Baltimore. You moved back to Rochester,
So we came back to Rochester.
and you got a job, or you went to the army?
No, I didn't get a job in Rochester, but I got a job in Los Angeles.
Okay, this is new information.
Huh?
This is new information.
Well, of course it's new. I had an aunt who lived in Los Angeles, who was married to a man who lived in New York and evidently was involved with the mafia somehow. I don't know all the details about it. But he had a trade. He knew how to make arch supports.
Arch supports for shoes.
Yeah.
Okay.
And he had to get out of town. And he disappeared for 10 years.
Wow.
Nobody knew where he was. And my aunt lived in New York. She had two sisters living with her. They all lived in the same apartment building in the Bronx.
Now this is your father's sister. These are your father's
Father's
sisters. Okay.
And eventually she found him, or he found her, or whatever. And they had a son, and they moved to Los Angeles. And he opened up this shop of making art supports. And he was a whiz at it. He was really fantastic. I mean, he had the whole West Coast tied up. All the podiatrists used to order stuff from him. And he had he made a fine, not only art supports, but all kinds of other things
Yeah.
for bunions and,
Quick
I
stuff.
mean, he was very creative, this guy. He was really sharp. And he offered me a job there for $15 a week. So we bought a car from my uncle, from her uncle, Will's uncle, and we took off together with a cousin of mine, also on my father's side, the son of another aunt.
What year was it?
This was 1940.
So what was it like driving across the country in 1940?
Well,
Where did you eat? Where did you sleep? How did it work?
we stayed at the three of us. I guess we stayed at Ma-Pa motels on the road,
Yeah.
and Will's uncle, we used to buy cars from him. We were the only people who he would sell a car to, who were members of the family, because we wouldn't bitch about it, you know. And this was after, but this was the first car we bought from him. It was this 1940. This was a 35 Dodge, and he had driven it for a number of weeks, and he said the car's in good shape. The only thing that could go wrong with it, he said, is the generator. In those days, a car had a generator. In other words, as you drove the car, it would generate electricity.
Okay.
Okay? So we went to a parts store in Rochester. They had a chain of Noah's Ark, which is another story. But anyway, and we bought this generator for $4, I guess. And he had it installed for us. His wife had a son who worked for him. He married a woman that was already married once before. And his son installed it, so it didn't cost me anything for the installation. So we're driving along, we were on this side. The famous route, east-west, was 66.
Okay.
And we were just getting into St. Louis. I don't know, maybe 10 miles outside. And the car conked out on us. And lucky it was that it wasn't far from a garage. So my cousin and I pushed the car and Lil steered it. And we got to the garage. And I was forewarned, is never have anybody do work for you when you're on the road, because they rob you. They rob you blind. So I told him the car stalled, and he figured out right away it was the new
generator.
And he was busy. We had to wait for him until we finished the job he was on. And then he said he could rebuild the generator. We weren't going to have a new one. Now, before we left Rochester, Bill's uncle said, after the rebuilt generator was put in, the used one, he threw in the old generator, the original one. He said, put this in it for a spare in case you need it. So what this mechanic said is he would rebuild the generator. So I said, would you like to rebuild our original generator? Because that was an air-cooled generator. So he said, sure. So he's taking it apart, and I'm starting to figure out how much he's going to charge me for this. And I'm trying to figure, it'd be cheaper to buy another used one. Anyway, he worked on it for about an hour, I guess. Cleaned it up, assembled it, put it on. It worked. I said, so how much do I owe you? He said, $1.50. I gave him $1.50. I gave him a 50-cent tip, I think.
So he was an honest mechanic.
He was an honest mechanic.
And you weren't stuck long.
But that reminds me of the story about the guy who wanted to borrow a jack. Better turn this off. Nobody has to hear this story. California. So we get to, we finally get to California, and
So there were no more adventures along the way?
well, not that I remember.
Was it exciting? Had you ever traveled? I mean, you've been to Palestine, but had you ever traveled in the U.S. like that, traveling or driving around?
No, and our main objective was to get to Los Angeles.
So you weren't.
We didn't stop at any
You weren't
parks,
excited about seeing.
and I didn't know about anything.
Okay.
The only thing I remember is driving through the desert, and what we did is we left at 4 in the morning, and they didn't have air conditioning those days, but they have some kind of a gadget you could put in your window that would sort of cool the air. And they had like a rental. You'd rent it at one end of the desert, then you'd turn it in at the other end. And we did that. And finally we got to Los Angeles. And we rented a nice bungalow for the three of us. And I had the car. And I went to work for my uncle for $15 a week. And I learned how to make art supports. I got very pretty good at it. So after, I don't know, a couple months or 3 months maybe, he gave me a raise of $3 for $18 a month. So for $18 a month, we were able to pay our share of the rent and buy enough food and buy gas for the car. And,
What was Lil doing?
well, we both went to night school. She studied accounting and I studied public speaking or something. So, but then...
Was she working or what?
Oh, she wasn't working. But then, my cousin decided he's going to move out. And we couldn't carry the rent for that place. And we went looking for another apartment. And, you know, those were the days when there was still discrimination against blacks, Jews, and dogs. And I remember we applied for an apartment in one building, and the superintendent said, didn't even ask our name, just looked at us and said, I have to tell you, I have nothing against you people, but the landlord doesn't want any Jews in the apartment. Now, how he knew that we were Jewish, I have no idea. Lil had sort of kinky hair like, whether he knew it from that, I don't know how he knew. But eventually we found an apartment that had a very interesting feature. It had a hot water coil that you didn't have a gas thing, but whenever you turned the hot water on, it came out hot. I guess with electric gadget or something.
Yeah.
And then my mother moved to California, to Los Angeles, with my brother.
Was she following you or just on her own decided to do that?
Well, I don't know whether she decided for that or whether she did it on her own or whatever. But anyway, she appeared in Los Angeles.
Your mother was on the move all the time.
That's right. And at the same time, Lil discovered that she was pregnant. So, for both reasons, she decided she'd like to come back to Rochester.
So things had already soured. The whole letter writing episode had occurred.
That hadn't started yet. That's later.
So.
That's later.
But Lil must have known that your mother wasn't that.
Well, she could feel it.
Okay, so she didn't.
Without any overt expression.
So the letter writing really was the kicker, but it had been going on before. Okay, that makes more sense. So you left.
So we left.
So how long had you lived there?
Well, we lived there from September to the end of January. What is that, 5 months?
Oh, okay, so a short time.
Huh?
A short time.
We came back to Rochester, and we had no place to live, of course, when we came back. We had sold when my cousin left, we sold the car to him, so we had a little money.
Well, how did you get back?
Came back by train, a 3-day ride on a train. Not a sleeper, but a coach. Well, you saw the country a little bit.
Yeah.
but it's not a, it wasn't a comfortable ride exactly, but we got back. And until we found a place to live, we stayed with her uncle. And then we found an apartment. It was right next to a firehouse, a red brick firehouse.
Hmm.
And our window of our bedroom was about 5 feet away from
The bell.
and we lived there during the months of June, July, and August. And Lil was towards the end of her pregnancy. And she had to walk up a flight of stairs to get there. And in the summer, the firehouse used to soak up the sun all day long. And our apartment was like a furnace. There was no cross ventilation.
And I'm noisy.
Well, it's very interesting about living next to a firehouse. The last house I lived at in Rochester was also next to a firehouse. And after the second night, you don't hear the fire trucks,
So it wasn't the noise that bothered you, it was the
the
heat.
heat. So we used to go out on the roof of a porch that was at the end of the apartment. And we used to take a blanket and sleep on the roof. It was a flat roof.
You weren't afraid of rolling off?
No, it was flat. There was no day. It was like this. There was no.
But was it large? I mean,
It was enough. I don't think we were concerned. And then I had to get a job.
yeah.
So, I had no skills or anything. I found a job for $15 a week. Working in a store that sold leather goods and supplies for, what's that? Oh, so leather goods and supplies to shoemakers. A Jewish man, every time I'd ask him for a raise, he would say, Rome wasn't built in a day. No, I learned that business, but and he was an interesting guy. He had a son who worked for him who used to tell me he was a good for nothing, he wants his money and he doesn't want to work. And a wife used to come in a few times a week, go to the cash register, take all the bills out of there. Anyway.
So you didn't really have a specific idea about what you wanted to do.
You're very right.
With life.
I had no idea.
You were just you just got these jobs.
Just going from one thing to the next without any direction.
But you did the arch supports and then now some other shoes. So
Yeah.
if I didn't know the rest of the story, I might say that you would end up selling shoes or become a shoe
I tried to
person.
do that. I wasn't a very good salesman. But before I went to Palestine, before I went to the training place, I decided I had to learn something. So when I got out of high school, I went to a shoemaker. I wanted to learn how to repair shoes when I got to the kibbutz. And an Irishman who agreed. I said, I'll do anything you want. Will you teach me how to fix shoes? Well, he never taught me how to fix shoes, but he taught me how to build a shoe from scratch.
So
And
you
I-
know how to make shoes.
And I actually made a pair of shoes for myself. They looked like little boats, but they were comfortable as hell. And
But you ended up not sticking with the shoes.
well, obviously not.
What happened?
But then I went to art supports. You know, that was something. So then I read a notice that they were looking to train machine shop people at night school. And by then Norm was born. And $15 a week wasn't going very far. But I'm trying to think. Yeah. When I was working at that guy, that supply place for shoemakers, and I was earning $15 a week. Every time I walked home, I used to walk. I used to go by electric shop, you know, electric supplies, where I noticed there was a mixer for $15. So for our first anniversary, I blew my whole week's pay on that mixer for Will.
Mm-hmm.
She nearly killed me, but she liked to bake.
Yeah.
Now where are we now?
Well, the
Oh,
birth
so
of
now-
Norm, but we have to pause because of another child.
Oh, he's
I'm going to see what's going on with him.